Welcome to Frightful Times. Written, edited, and produced by Push Button Fling Things Productions. Narrated by Daniel Mahan. The cat was a tiny black kitten, super soft and furry. I found her at a local flea market. I think I paid $20 for her or something. I am of course ashamed to admit this now, but at the time, my friends and I thought it was hilarious to get her stoned. The first time we did it, we took turns blowing the smoke into her face. When we let her go, about 2 minutes later, she bolted straight across the room, hit a cabinet, and after amazingly and almost instantly redirecting her own body, disappeared into the bedroom. I named her Tripaziah. From that day forward, she was as big a stoner as I was. When the pot came out, so did she. It wasn't a few days later that I found a dog. I went to this old ranch where these people were giving away some German Shepherd mixed puppies. I went to the gate to inquire, but before I could even say anything, 3 beautiful 15-pound pups were running full blast toward the fence line where I stood. I chose the one that chose me. She ran straight to me without hesitation, licked my hands, and stood on her hind legs as if to say, "Get me out of here, I want to go with you!" She was the sweetest dog I have ever known. She never barked unless she was warning me, but even then, only if it was very serious. She never barked at friends who came to the door. If it was a stranger, she might bark or growl for just a moment, but as soon as I showed her that it was okay, she'd show them as much love as she did me. Just a really cool dog, amazingly smart, and to this day, I miss her dearly. She was so sweet and kind, in fact, that I named her Mika, because she was so meek. Fast forward a couple weeks, and the creepy landlord, and I do mean creepy dude, but I won't go into that. He pops by and sees the dog. He tells me he doesn't allow dogs, and I had to get rid of her or leave. I looked through the paper to find a new place, but money was a little tight. Or at least, I was really stupid with my money and didn't want to put too much toward my living space. Huge mistake. I came across an ad for a barn apartment out near my old stomping grounds, an old rural farm and ranch town called Marion. Neighbors were as far from each other as civilization itself. I kind of liked the idea of getting back to nature, and the price couldn't be beat. It was a quarter of the cost of most places. I think it was $225 a month. Crazy, right? Well, I went to check it out, and it was definitely more barn than apartment. It was very much in the middle of nowhere. It definitely had that all-too-familiar Texas Chainsaw Massacre type vibe. The barn was a towering altar to gray-weathered wood. The front porch was the nicest feature, and it looked like it might fall in on itself any day now. Once inside, the true state of it became clear. It was a mess. The floors were slanted, the walls were plywood, it had no sheetrock or insulation. This thing was all body and no guts. The entire structure was just particle board and plywood. In fact, the closet had baseball-sized holes in it. If I didn't know better, I might have considered them the perfect size for the barrel of a 12-gauge shotgun to poke out from in defense of the homestead. The carpet was hideous. Like the kind in dentists' offices, but really grimy. The boring square bathroom had a boring square tub, and it didn't even have a shower head. The floor was literally particle board. The kitchen was a joke. It didn't even have an oven. It was just a sink, a tiny fridge, and 2 huge cabinets. It did have running water and electricity, though, so I guess it was all right, but yeah, this place was messed up. I really don't know what I was thinking, except that I thought Mika and Tripaziah would have plenty of space to sprawl out and play. Cows were roaming around on the driveway. The barn apartment aside, though, it was actually overall pretty peaceful. The rent was dirt cheap, and since it was summer, I wasn't thinking about things like insulation. I paid the first month and moved in, with the owner reminding me to always close the gate behind me. 80 feet away on the same property was a large gutted house. The place was an incredible 3 stories, plus a basement. It was mostly skeletal on the interior, but the exterior had walls and smashed-out windows. The roof was weathered and rusted steel with gargoyles on the ends of each peak. There were lots of peaks. Did someone actually choose this? Like, what catalog were they looking at? The house couldn't have been weirder than the people that built it. It was super creepy in there during the day. Never mind the night. I don't know what the hell I was thinking, but I would make my way through the maze of that house often and even go sit on the roof while I got high or drunk. I'm lucky I didn't fall. It would have been bad. Once I had moved in, several friends came to hang out, drink, smoke, play music, and even make stupid mini-movies with my camcorder. My friends and I took it upon ourselves to explore the abandoned house and found some pretty creepy stuff, like bullet holes in the basement, windows, and walls. Without going into a large dissertation, come to find out that the previous owner had apparently been deranged. He would hang out in the basement with his rifle and shoot at cars that passed by. He'd been reported on several times, but never spent more than a few days in county lockup. Ultimately, though, the guy ended up shooting his entire family with that rifle before turning it on himself. That house was insanely creepy. My friends hated to love going in there, but it wasn't long before all of us had come to the conclusion that it was bad news to even go near that thing. We ceased our activities there almost as quickly as we had started them. It just didn't feel right. The barn was sheltered from the rain, and that's about it. Just a tiny step above a tent. Whatever it was like outside, so it was inside. I had some space heaters and AC wall units, but as you might imagine, they only worked to keep the place bearable. The ceilings were so high and the walls so thin that keeping any room cold or warm was an exercise in futility. It didn't take long for people to start getting exceedingly creepy vibes. Most began refusing to come out anymore, even saying things like, "I love you, man, but I cannot go out to that place. It gives me the heebie-jeebies, bud." I always laughed these things off, but I must admit it got lonely. Fewer and fewer friends, all the less frequently, would make it out to come see me. A few times I felt a little on edge, maybe a goosebump or two, but nothing of consequence. I just didn't think about it, to be honest. I was just way too busy being drunk or stoned or whatever. Actually, come to think of it, I was pretty numb to life at the time. Paranormal activity? Man, it just wasn't on my radar. I was oblivious. It just didn't have my attention. That all came to an end when my attention was literally forced onto what was happening around me. It was like whatever it was had tired of being ignored, and the reckoning came in the form of blatant demonstrations. The first such instance was on my 21st birthday, no less. It was February 9th, 1996. Back then, not everyone had cell phones. In fact, most people didn't. Don't get me wrong, though. Ugly gray flip phones were on the rise, but if my memory serves, I think the pager was reigning supreme at that time. I don't think I had either when this happened. I hadn't yet gotten a landline either, so I had no way to communicate with the outside world. I remember vaguely seeing my parents that day. They'd given me this card with some money in it and wished me well. Awesome parents, by the way. I'm super close to those guys. Love them dearly. I love them more than words can say, but that's beside the point. I guess I just want to convey that this was not a neglectful thing. They thought I was going off to go do what a normal, stupid 21-year-old was going to do the weekend of his birthday. They bid me be careful, professed their love, and that was that. The night of the 9th, 2 days before my birthday, I parked my truck in the driveway. I had a small black and white television and a tape player with no stereo function. The TV almost never worked, so at this juncture my communication with the outside world was almost non-existent. When I awoke the morning of the 10th, I made a terrible discovery. A horrible storm had come through. I slept like the dead, so I had no idea. It brought with it heavy rains, chilling winds, and an alarming drop in temperature. To my dismay, I realized that my truck was drowned in the mud. The trunk had sunk almost a foot where it stood. The tires were barely visible. Try as I might, I could not get out. I was stuck. I was stuck and I had no way to tell anyone. The realization came to me that a storm this bad meant that most everybody was probably staying home. People in Texas don't fare so well against ice and snow monsters, so when they come through, We all stay inside and don't budge until they leave. I knew I wasn't going anywhere and that no one would be coming my way either. Unfortunately, the bad news wasn't over. I went back into my freezing cold house to find that the electricity had gone out. So I had no way to stay warm. I had no TV or radio. I had no phone. I checked my cabinets and I had no food of any kind anywhere, save a half-empty bag of uncooked pinto beans. The pipes were frozen, so I had no running water. I think I remember that I had a beer or a bottled water maybe, but I can't say for sure. I don't really remember drinking anything, but I had a habit of being a bit of a slob. I'm sure there had to have been at least a cup or two or a can or two of half-drunken libations laying around. Anyway, I knew that all I could do at this point was hunker down. Me, my cat, my dog, a pack of cigs, and I think one crocheted blanket that my mom had given me were in for a long night. It was February 11th, my birthday. I remember dropping out of unconsciousness, still sitting up on my bed, leaning back against the paper-thin wall behind me. It was cold. I could see my breath as I exhaled. My dog and cat were curled up on the bed with me, and it helped, but not a lot. I was shivering. I was hungry. I was tired and bored and would have given anything to get out of there. I remembered I had the baked beans. I had no water and no electricity, though. The circumstance was just so sad, so utterly pathetic that I still can't believe it is actually a piece of my life. I sat on that bed, holding the blanket to myself as I shivered in the all-consuming gray of my surroundings. The wind whispered and howled around me, occasionally making its way through a hole in this crummy excuse for an apartment and would bite me on the occasionally exposed toe, finger, or nose. I was miserable, and I literally felt my ass hit rock bottom when I introduced a stone of a pinto bean to my lips. I tried to think of M&Ms as I popped them like aspirin, swallowing them whole. This was the worst birthday cake ever. And my super important benchmark 21st birthday was remarkably unremarkable. I recall night. I was shivering still. I re-entered the land of the living with the faint smell of feces and urine. The dog and cat were with me. They had defecated and urinated on the floor around me. I suppose I can thank the cold for keeping the smell at bay. Usually, they were great animals, and they went outside to do their business, but I was too weak and sad to put any effort into anything, much less a trip to the bitter cold outside for a proper potty. Things were getting worse. My stomach was in knots, and I was beginning to fantasize about this weather passing and the amazing meal that awaited me. The wind continued to howl outside. The room was pitch black. I don't know what time it was, but it was late. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. I sat there holding the blanket close to my neck and chest, clasping the ends as if it were keeping the warm inside, and I did not dare let any out. I remember searching the dank darkness. I needed to be able to see something, anything. Slowly, the tiny black and white TV's frame began to take shape. I could see just the most faint version of its lines. But where was the light coming from? And then I noticed it. There was a tiny red light, presumably where the power light might be, but no, there wasn't any electricity. Then it began to grow. It began to move. It began to swirl. It was a red orb. I can liken it to those videos we have all seen of the red and yellow burning sun, pulsating and swirling as each color replaces the other in a violent dance of light. It began to rise into the air, reaching its peak in perfect line with my eyes. I dared not look away. I was motionless. I was terrified, yet calm. This is stupid, I thought. I'm seeing things. This isn't real, I told myself. I wanted to move, but I couldn't. The orb got closer and closer. It was once the size of a needle prick. It was now as big as a marble. It continued to grow as it approached me. It was now evident that it was aiming for my chest. It began to slowly fall as it neared me. It ended up about the size of a racquetball. It hovered about 8 inches from my chest, wobbly in the air, refusing to allow my gaze to leave it. I was petrified, void of comfort and free will. I could only wait. I was convinced the nightmare was just beginning, that something was about to happen. Instead, it just began to fade away from me. It rose up to my eye line and continued to back away. I was growing cross-eyed as I could see it growing ever smaller until it was so small and far away it ceased to be, at least to me. I questioned myself over and over what this could have been. I didn't know what to make of it. I found myself drifting back to sleep. When I woke the next day, the sun was out, the storm was over, and my dear old dad had made it out to check on me. I had made it through the worst birthday of my life, but oddly enough, the most memorable.